Hello and welcome. Let us take a break from Chennai history and go off to the north and let us look at the Mughal Gardens, which are all in the news today. It has recently been announced that the name of the Mughal Gardens just behind the Rashtrapati Bhavan will be changed to Amrit Udyan. Whatever be the reasons for the name change and whatever be the new name, it is necessary for us to understand as to what is the history of a Mughal garden. What is so special about a Mughal garden and why is it that such a name has really come about? For that, we really need to go back in history to the 16th century, to the arrival of Babur when he first conquered the Lodi Empire in 1526 at the First Battle of Panipat. Prior to the coming of the Mughals, we did have a concept of gardens, but it was they who really refined it into a fine art. Babur, in fact, really missed the gardens of his hometown back in what is present-day Afghanistan. And when he came here, he lamented about the fact that India was a place full of flies and dust and that there was not a suitable garden for him to relax in. In fact, the Mughals were not people who really lived in palaces. They essentially preferred to live in open pavilions surrounded by beautiful gardens. And having therefore come to India and settled in Agra, Babur moved into what was then called Aram Bagh, or the Garden of Relaxation. And that is where he first laid out his plan for a formal garden. What was this idea of a formal garden? The Mughals and people from the Islamic religion, it must not be forgotten, essentially came from what was a desert area. And therefore, their idea of paradise was a lush green garden with plenty of water flowing in it. The idea of paradise itself, as per Islam, was a formal garden divided into 4 quarters with canals of fresh water flowing in it. They did not believe in lawns, which was essentially a colonial tradition. What they really wanted was to have plenty of shade-giving trees that would give fruits and a lot of flower-bearing plants that would give out a lot of perfume. And this is what Babur envisaged when he first planned out Aram Bagh, which is even today known as Ram Bagh in the town of Agra. After Babur, as we all know, Humayun had a tough time in retaining his kingdom, and it was only in the 1550s that the Mughal Empire once again came back to some semblance of stability. And when Humayun passed away in the 1550s, his son Akbar and one of Humayun's wives, Haji Begum, planned out what would become the Humayun's tomb in Delhi. And that was really the first formal design for a beautiful garden, in the center of which would be the formal monument or the tomb. And they gave full vent to their imagination. Today, when we go to Humayun's tomb, you find that there are lots of lawns and very few trees. But that is not the way it was originally laid out. It had canals of water and it had plenty of flowering plants and fruit-giving trees. Akbar and his son Jahangir would raise the level of planning of gardens to great extent. And in Kashmir, beautiful gardens would come up. Wherever the Mughals went, to Delhi, to Agra, to Lahore, wherever they went, they would carry with them the concept of their gardens. It was always that the monument or the pavilion that they designed would be in the middle of this entire setting. One major change would come with the design of the Taj Mahal. When Shah Jahan decided to build the Taj Mahal, he placed it at one end of the garden and not right in the middle. And that was a formal change that he would bring about, after which several gardens would begin to follow that design. The Red Fort in Delhi itself would have 2 beautiful gardens. One was called the Hayat Baksh Garden, the life-giving garden, and the other one was called the Mehtab Garden, which was the moonlit garden. When you just think about these names, you can imagine what these gardens would have provided for at a time when there was no air conditioning, no artificial method of ventilation, during the hot summer months and during the rainy season and in winter. The plants would have kept changing, the trees would have kept producing flowers or fruits depending upon the season or just giving shade, and all these places was where the Mughal emperor and his court and his extensive harem of begums would all go to relax and listen to music. The Mughal garden itself would continue to remain a concept till 1857, and that was the year when we had what the British referred to as the Sepoy Mutiny, and we speak of as the First War of Indian Independence. When the British came back, they engaged in an orgy of destruction. Several of the beautiful gardens were completely destroyed. Barracks were built where there were flowering plants and trees. Many of the Mughal pavilions were completely ground to dust. And that really spelled the end of the Mughal garden itself. Thereafter, it was all lawns and herbaceous borders and trees based upon what was the British idea of beauty. The concept of a Mughal garden was just in somebody's imagination. Nobody knew what it was. Then in 1911, when the capital shifted back from Calcutta to New Delhi, work on the Rashtrapati Bhavan, or what was then known as Government House or Viceroy's House, began. When the Viceroy's House design was submitted by Sir Edwin Lutyens, who was the main architect for the building, he did not include a Mughal garden in it. He in fact included a formal British garden as a setting for the Viceroy's house. Sir Edwin did not like Indian architecture. He did not like Indian garden design. He considered everything Indian to be in fact inferior. It required an entire committee to sit on him, beginning from Queen Mary, the Viceroy Lady Hardinge, several Indian officials, the architect from Madras, Robert Fellows Chisholm. Several people had to write and represent that if we were building in India, you needed to include Indian designs. And very reluctantly, finally, the concept of a garden set in what was the Mughal style came into being. Lutyens didn't like it. He said the whole thing is like Alice in Wonderland. Sunken terraces, canals, herbaceous borders, flowers. He didn't like the idea of a Mughal garden at all. But let's not forget that people had forgotten what a Mughal garden looked like. Finally, they had to take refuge in the work of a lady, an English woman, Constance Villiers Stewart, who had done research on Mughal gardens. And it was her idea that was finally incorporated at the back of Rashtrapati Bhavan or Viceroy's house. It still is not a pure Mughal idea of a garden. It is Mughal garden with a lot of colonial ideas built into it, and that is what we have inherited post-independence. Later, after independence, it became customary to open the Mughal gardens to the public once a year in the month of March, when the Delhi weather is at its best and most of the flowers are blooming in the spring. I have been to it as a student, and you are not allowed to stay even for 1 minute at any one location. In those days, of course, we didn't have cell phones, and even today, cell phones are not allowed when you go into the Mughal gardens. You're just expected to go quickly around the entire garden and come out. But it is a thing of beauty. Is it necessary to change the name of such a historical area to something else is a matter of debate. But then in history, we have always had name changes. Every new kingdom, every new political party changes names to suit its convenience. But history doesn't change. We may call it by a new name, but in the records, at one time, it was referred to as the Mughal Gardens. And that is something that will never go out of existence. It is time that we learn to appreciate history for what it is without making an attempt to change it.